Morai Rabotai, we are continuing on Masechet Chagigah, and we are on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, and the learning of Amud Yomi today is for Zchut Yeshua ben Dina Diana and Yael bat Rivka. We are in the middle of Daf Chaf. This is really the last Gemara of the Perek, and the discussion really is, as we started yesterday, a certain level of awareness of what you are dealing with as the levels of Tahara are concerned. And we mentioned two chidushim really of the Gemara, one of them in the name of Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar, which really if a person does not have direct hashgacha on the item that they're dealing with, that item is going to become tameh. In other words, in practice, if I have my garment hanging over my shoulder and he falls down, and I ask my friend right there in my presence, pick it up and give it to me, and he's a chaver, he is a person that's mindful and careful with taharot, and he picks it up and gives it to me, the garment is tameh. That was the first chidush that we saw. Then we saw Rabbi Yonatan, the second chidush of the Gemara, was even a higher level, that if you think that you're taking one garment of Bigdei Chol, and then by mistake you take a garment of Bigdei Shabbat, so you thinking that you're wearing your suit that's weekday, but really it's a Shabbat suit that you're wearing, that becomes tameh. Why? So the Gemara says because, well, we thought, at least, that the reason is because you don't know which one you're wearing, and lack of that level of knowledge is going to be a problem for keeping Taharot. Which really, at that stage of the Gemara, would mean that would be the same halacha if it would be reverse. If you think you're taking your Bigdei Shabbat, but you end up taking your Bigdei Chol, it would be the same halacha that would become tameh. That was the original understanding that we have had. That's the second one, and then the third one would be Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. So the second one was Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram. We said the whole story about, and then Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, that says the two women that they switched their clothing without their knowledge, by mistake, each one takes the other one's garments, they become tameh. And says the Gemara, this is a story that actually happened, and the psak was given by Rabbi Akiva, that is tameh. So that was the chidush that the Gemara said. The Gemara challenged it by saying, wait, since when, if I don't know what I'm taking, it becomes tameh? Well, if I put my hand into a basket to want to take a piece of bread that's wheat bread, and I by mistake take a barley bread, that becomes tameh? Just because I took something by mistake? What kind of chidush is that? Right? And if you want to say that that's correct, says the Gemara, how about the case of, he brought the actual braita, that you have a person guarding a chavit, a barrel of, he thinks is wine, but it ends up being shemen, ends up being oil. So according to what we said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar and his friends, what's going to be the halacha? Right? According to Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar and Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram and Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, it's going to be tameh. The Braita says it's tahor. It's fine. And even though that the Braita says that you can't drink it, is because the guy says, I didn't keep this for lower levels of tumah, only higher levels of tumah I kept it from. And then when I went back and forth, can you have a halfway shmirah? And we saw that you could have halfway shmirah. This is where we ended yesterday, which means now we are holding by a very strong question on everything that we said. The halakha that the Gemara wanted to say in the name of these three people, which is really two halachot. One is that the initial one is Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar, who said the halakha of you thinking that something is number A, and it actually ends up being number B, that becomes tameh. And again, if your coat, if jacket falls down on the ground and someone takes it for you, that becomes tameh. And the second halacha was the exchanging of you yourself or the two women. Those the two halachot, which three scenarios. Really, there are two categories, and there are three scenarios, because Rabbi Yonatan, the second and the third, are really the same thing, with a little knetch different. The second one, Rabbi Yonatan Bar Amram, is the case of you switching your Bigdei Shabbat and Bigdei Chol. And then Rabbi Lazar Ber Sadok is the two women. But that's really the same thing. We put it in one category. And the first category was Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar, who speaks about your jacket falling down, someone giving it to you, right? The reason I'm saying these two categories is important because you'll see Gemara goes back and forth with these two to answer them. Those are the two things that we said. And now the Gemara says, what? We know that you could keep a barrel and the shmirah is just fine. So what's the halacha? Says the Gemara. Let's now read through the answer. Mikol makom kasha, basically the Gemara says. Say it again. Correct. So it says the Gemara, Mikol makom kasha. This is 14 lines up from the wide lines. That's where it is. So says the Gemara, Mikol makom kasha. At the end of the day, we have this question. Now we went through Shemirah lechatzain, whether or not you could have halfway Shemirah or not. But at the end of the day, we have this big kasha on the Amoraim that said that if I picked my suit by mistake, or the woman who switched by mistake their clothing, it becomes tameh. Well, we see from here that if you think that is yayin when it's really shemen, it's fine. Ve'od, says the Gemara, I have another kasha also over here, and that is from Rabba bar Avua, Maaseh be'isha achat, shebat lifnei Rabbi Ishmael. There was a woman that came in front of Rabbi Ishmael, ve'amra lo Rabbi, beget ze araktiv b'tahara. Says, look, I was not super careful, planning on using this for tahara, but I was tahor, everything was tahor, it must have been tahor, nobody was at home really. I was doing this myself, I was not a nida, I was not a zava, I was not temeah, so it should be fine, even though that my mind was not there. I wasn't planning to use this for taharot. What happens, chacham? What's the halacha? So this is prime example of someone not having their mind on taharot, but practically speaking, what could have gone wrong? Type of thing. So says the Gemara, but I was not planning, I was not thinking of keeping this with the shmirah, with tahara. ומתוך בדיקות שהיה Rabbi Ishmael bodka, so Rabbi Ishmael took this very seriously. Instead of saying, oh wow, yeah, what could be wrong? Chazaku Baruch, have a nice day. He started cross-examining, asking questions. Oh, how was it? Where did you set it up? How did you set it up? Who helped you by, the strings, putting it, because when you do the weaving, when you do ariga, you need to set up a batenir. It has to be stretched and tied, and so he started going through methodically through all the process of how this was done, and from the questioning, it comes out like this. It says, actually at some point in the beginning, there was my neighbor who was a nida that came and helped me a little bit for the batenir, that he could have moved the structure, and a nida that moves in structure is a tumat hesed. When you move something as a nida, it will become tameh. Now, one little hakdama that's important to know in Tumah v'Tahara, if you have a little string, that's really not important when it comes to halachot of Tumah v'Tahara. it has to be a beged that has the minimum size for becoming tameh. What's the minimum size? 3 etzbaot by 3 etzbaot, right? 3 etzbaot by 3 etzbaot is the about this size basically. It's the size, the minimum size of a beged that is called a beged. So therefore, it must be.
What is a beged?
Sorry?
What are you clothing with this much cloth?
Well, you're not clothing necessarily. Usage is not just covering yourself. It's, you could blow your nose sometimes, right? You could do a bedikat hefsek ta'ara. You could do different things. The minimum size that could be used for something substantial and significant would be 3 etzbaot by 3 etzbaot. These are shurim that we have. Again, it's not the place over here, but you must understand that this is not just guy had a string and the nida touched it, so it becomes tameh. Right? It has to be a minimum shiur of a beged, and a minimum shiur of a beged is 3 by 3 etzbaot. So she says, well, yeah, for 2 minutes this woman came, but she didn't touch anything. She didn't touch anything. She just, was helping me with the batanir, and she moved this. Hazaku baruch. The whole thing is tameh. Because, again, to madheset, and you're not thinking, when you're not careful, this is the whole chidush of the Gemara. When you're not mindful of planning to use this for ta'arot afterwards, your mind does not register the sensitivities. Afterwards you think like, nobody was there, I did it myself. Your mind blocks the fact that your neighbor that was tumat nida came in for 2 seconds and she didn't touch anything, right? But then when you go through it, say, she actually helped me move the batenir. And there you go, in Chotuma v'Tahara, the thing became tameh. So what does Rabbi Ishmael say? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Ishmael said the famous words that Rabbi Ishmael says in multiple places throughout Shas. Said Rabbi Ishmael, Amar Rabbi Ishmael, Kama gedolim divrei chachamim. How great are the words of chachamim, shehayu omrim, that they would say, Belibo l'shomro tahor, and belibo l'shomro tameh. That if you had in mind going forward that this is going to be used for taharot, then you keep it properly and it's tahor. If you didn't have in mind at the time that this is going to be used for taharot, it's tameh. Kama gedolim divrei chachamim. Now you see another story with Rabbi Ishmael. Shuv ma'aseh b'isha achat shmat lifnei Rabbi Ishmael. Another woman who came to Rabbi Ishmael, amra lo Rabbi, mapazu araktia betara. This mapa, this tablecloth, I made it betara. Nobody was tameh. I was not tameh. In fact, I just went to mikveh like 5 minutes before I started doing this. So mamash, chazaku baruch. And no one was home. My neighbor didn't come. Nobody was there. I did this myself. So it should be tahor, right? So says the Gemara, V'lo haya belibi l'shomra, but I was not thinking of keeping it because I was not planning to use this for taharot. But now I decided to use it for taharot. What's the halacha? Can I use it or not? So we already know the halacha should be the haya beliba, yes. Lo haya beliba, no. But Rabbi Ishmael started cross-examining her again, going through everything, and turns out like this: Umitoch bedikot shaya Rabbi Ishmael botka. Throughout the bedikot that Rabbi Ishmael was cross-examining, asking questions, trying to set up the way it happened at the time in real time. Amralo, she says, actually, it's not a problem at all because I went to mikveh mamash 5 minutes before I did this. I set it up. There was a string that actually got cut off, right? And I tied it with my mouth. I put it. I set up everything. Then I went to mikveh and I came out and I did it. So Rishma said, wait a second. Did you just say that you tied something with your mouth? Yes. That's a problem because a rok of nida is metameh. Now, even though that at the time that she did it, the rok was only on a string, and string is not shlosha bar shlosha. But 5 minutes later, you started doing this, and the rok is going to be there, who knows, for another hour, 2 hours, it's going to be still wet. As long as it's wet, it's metameh. And you perhaps had the shelosha by the time that it was still wet, and the whole thing is tameh. So says Rabbi Ishmael again those heavenly words. He says, kama gedola divrei chachamim. So let's read the Gemara. Umitoch bedikot shaya Rabbi Ishmael botka amra lo Rabbi nima nifskali. Before I went to mikveh, I had this string that got popped, and I tied it together. V'ksharti abepe. I did it with my mouth, and then I set it up, and I went to mikveh. Amar Rabbi Ishmael kama gedolim. First wide line, divrei chachamim. How great are divrei chachamim? Shayu omrim belibo leshomro tahor, em belibo leshomro tameh. Okay, amazing. So before, I just want to open one parenthesis over here to give a little bit backdrop and history to this. Perhaps one could say, perhaps, that the reason Rabbi Ishmael says these words over and over and over again is maybe because of a story that he experienced himself. The famous Gemara, probably the most famous time that he said this, is in Masechet Shabbat Daf Yud Bet, where Chazal say you cannot read on Shabbat le'or haner. Why? Why can't I learn le'or haner? We actually had in yeshiva about 22 years ago. One time we had a hurricane, and the yeshiva is built in the middle of a forest, basically. The whole Baltimore really is built in the middle of a forest. Everywhere that's not houses is wood, and mamash is like in the middle of a forest. So tens of thousands of trees were uprooted. Regions, complete areas lost electricity and power because everything was cut off by trees falling. So yeshiva was one of them. On Friday we lost everything, and throughout Shabbat basically it was pitch black everywhere. So Bet Midrash, they did little candles and stuff like that. So actually this halakha became very nogea. Now you can't read le'or haner, right? So what does the Gemara say you can't read le'or haner? So you use teapots, it's a little, tea light's a little different, but because Shema Yateh, maybe you go into tilted. Right? So Gemara says there, Rabbi Ishmael said, Shema Yateh, who's going to be Mateh? Right? Ani Ekra, I'm going to read and I'm not going to do it. Right? And what happened was, he read, and it was the sugya of Amud Yomi, it was so gishmak, he got into it, and before you know it, he was Mateh Dener. Your Mateh Dener, again, it wasn't like the candles that you have nowadays. It was a ner in language of the Gemara is the vessel that was filled with the oil, right? That was wide on one side, and then it became narrow on the other side, and the ptila came out. So when you were mateh, the oil would come close to the ptila, to the head of the ptila, and the flame would go up. That's what people did to get more light when something was not clear. And he went into his regular mode, and he was mateh, and that's a chiyuv d'oraita. And he wrote, Rabbi Ishmael said, Kama gedolah divrei chachamim, and he wrote on his pinkas, it says, Ani Ishmael ben Nishav, when the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, I have to bring a chatat shemena. I have to bring a korban chatat, right? So, Kama gedolim divrei chachamim. So if a person in chacham kibal nisayon, when a person has gone through it himself, say, see, you think chachamim don't know what they're talking about. You think it's far-fetched. You think it's divrei chachamim kedarbonot. Is the words of chachamim, the Gemara says, are more important and fundamental than Yeina Shel Torah, than even the divrei Torah themselves. Is something very powerful and fundamental to be mindful of. But again, this is Rabbi Ishmael himself. Kama gedolim divrei chachamim, says the Gemara. Now we're in the middle of answering these questions, right? Now we basically said what? This is the Gemara bringing the question that we had. The Mikol Makom is questionable, and the Gemara is in amidst giving an answer. Says the Gemara, Bishlama. So Gemara says, okay, the second and the third is not such a kasha. The first one is a kasha. Now you see why it's important. In the beginning we set up the levels, right? Again, the first one was Rabbi Yonatan ben Elazar. For a guy's jacket falling and someone picking it up for him. That's the first. Then we had Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram, which was the guy switching his Bigdei Shabbat for Bigdei Chol. And the third was Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, which is the two women. So the two last ones, the Gemara says, is not such a big kasha. I could answer those two. The first one, I have no pshat. Right? The Gemara goes backwards through the third and the second, and then the Gemara says, okay, what's the answer to the first one? And the Gemara deals with that. So says the Gemara, Bishlama, I understand that Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok kol achat v'achat. According to Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, each one of them Omeret Chaveri Eshed Ha'aretz. That's the third case, right? The two women. So in the case of two women, each one of them says, I don't know these women. I am Eshed Chaver. Be careful with it. But she's probably Eshed Ha'aretz. I don't have to really watch this from becoming Tameh. When you decide in your mind that I don't have to watch this for becoming Tameh, what happened right now? That is Hesach Hadat. You took your mind off of this from watching it for Tarot. And that Hesach Hadat is good enough for it becoming Tameh.
Is that because they didn't know each other?
Yes, correct.
If they did know, then it would be different?
But because again, each one of them wore the other one's garment, right? Or the two cases over there that you know the woman realized, okay, this is not my garment, so I don't know whose it is. And probably she's Eshed Ha'aretz, so therefore I don't have to really be careful. Even though that it ended up being that both of them were Eshed Chaver, it still will come Tameh. So it says, the Gemara, Umasach data mimena. Therefore you're Mesiach dat, you take your mind off of it, and that would be Tameh. The Rabbi Yonatan ben Amram, the second case of the person switching Bigdei Shabbat instead of Bigdei Chol, meaning he thinks he's wearing Bigdei Chol, whereas he really is wearing Bigdei Shabbat. Says the Gemara, Nami kevan the kelim de Shabbat avid leu shimur tfeh, because the kelim of Shabbat you're more careful about, right? You're more careful for Bigdei Shabbat. The Meiri writes over here, the Bigdei Shabbat is because of Kedushat Shabbat. You're more careful than Taharot, right? So it's not really practical reason, but it is more because of the holiness of Shabbat. There is a Sefer Mekadesh Lot Tshuvot Mekadeshei Hashem of Meislish. It was a tremendous. This is not time right now to discuss the history of this Sefer. I actually borrowed this from Rabbi Friend. He had the actual hard copy of it. A tremendous story. The Hakdama of the Sefer. He was a person with his son. Both of them, he was a posek before the war, and he was in concentration camp with his son together, and he writes many of the questions that he got during the course of him staying in the concentration camps, and it's just heart-wrenching going through some of this, especially in the Akdama. He brings the story of his Rosh Hashanah, how he did so many sets of tkiyot with the shofar that they had smuggled in, and he literally endangered his life. There was this group of boys that were going to be taken to the gas chambers that day, and they begged him from the outside the back to go and blow for them. He had already done like 100 sets, and his son said, Abba, I beg you, don't go, because if they catch you, if the guard comes, they lock the place and they take them to thing. Whoever is inside there. So if you go in, you're going to be taken to gas chambers, right? It's horrifying that he actually ended up going, even though that he writes, in retrospect, when I think about it, my son was right, and halachically I did something wrong, but he kind of like says that the rules and regulations there was so different, and you have to understand the mindset. These are the type of questions that he got. It's tremendous sefer. So he writes in Siman Bet, in Chelkal Siman Bet, he writes, the pshat in this Gemara is, because Bigdei Shabbat are more expensive, right? Well, if you have a $50 suit and you give it to dry cleaners every time, so after 5 times, like the Germans say, like 4 moves equals a fire, right? So this is also a number of times of dry cleaning ruins the quality of the thing. So if you have Bigdei Shabbat, right? It's very expensive. You have like a $5,000 suit. You don't want to take it to dry cleaners every day because it ruins it. It makes it shiny, makes it this. So it says Bigdei Shabbat, you're very careful because it's expensive. You don't want it to become tameh and have to go through the whole process of tahara, which could diminish from the quality of it. So that's why he says it's a very practical thing. It's not necessarily because of Kedushat Shabbat. It's because it's a more expensive item. You're much more careful and mindful of it. So says the Gemara. The first one that we mentioned, the guy's garment that fell down and someone picked it up for him and gave it to him, that one, what's the big deal? You're there. You're seeing what's happening. What's the big deal if you are watching and you will be the mashkiach? So says the Gemara, no. It's chazakah that you do not keep something that your friend is holding. It's very easy for something to become tameh. All it takes is 1 split second of touching something. That's all it takes. And therefore, a person does not, is not mindful enough, is not careful enough to be able to keep something from tum'ah when somebody else is holding it. It doesn't work like that. You have to be dealing with it yourself. You can't be meshamer. You cannot be guarding something that someone else is holding. If he himself is guarding it, good. If he himself is not guarding it, you can't really be shomer, something that you're not holding, someone else is holding. Because he makes one wrong move, one wrong touch to something, and the whole thing is tamein, 1 split second.
If that person was guarding it the whole time, they said, oh, I had it by accident, but I was guarding it the whole time for you, even though you didn't want them to guard it.
No, if he says it, yes.
Then you're okay.
Yeah, because again, somebody who's holding it is guarding it for tahara. Gemara says, what? Velo, you can't guard something that someone else is holding? Vehatanya, we have a braita that seems to indicate not like that. Says the Gemara, if you have a case that his donkey riders and his workers were carrying his taharot. So your items of tahara is being carried by a caravan, and it's all yours, and you're careful in taharot. Even though that you are far from them a whole meal, it's still tahor. So wait a second. You're guarding your taharot that are being handled by these poalim, by these workers and donkey riders, and you're a mile away from them and it's still tahor, says the Gemara. So you see from there that you could be meshamer your items even though that someone else is holding it, right?
First case was your friend though. Your friend was...
Correct, but still is not good. And here, it seems to be it's good. So how do you deal with this braita? Seemingly indicating that you could be watching it. No, the Gemara there is saying that you are watching it even though that your friend is not, yeah. So you're doing the shmirah when someone else is handling it. The Gemara said that Rabbi Yochanan's halakha is you cannot watch something that someone else is holding. The Gemara says, how do you, the braita says not like that. The braita says you're a mile away and you're keeping it, right? And it's good. Taharotav teorot is tahor. Ve'im amar lahem, the end of the braita is, if you told them, lechu v'ani avo acharechem, you guys go ahead, I'll go after you then. Kevan shenit'almu einav mehen, once you no longer can see them, then taharotav temeot. Then the taharot are no longer tahor. So first and foremost, we have to reconcile the beginning and the end of the Mishnah, the braita, right? The beginning seems like even if you're a mile away, it's good. And then he says, as soon as you lose sight of them, is bad. So it says Gemara, my shena resha, my shena sefa. What's the difference between resha and sefa? Amar b'yitzchak nafcha. Resha b'metaher chamarav upalav. The resha is talking about the case that the guy was metaher the entire caravan. He said, guys, I'm going to be taking my taharot, delivering them. So you guys go to mikveh, you do a haref shemesh, you clean everything, all the garments, all the things on the sacks and the donkeys, everything has to be tahor. So everything is tahor. Lachen, lekach, upalav lekach. The Gemara says, Iachi sefa nami. So if that's correct, sefa also should be tahor. What's the difference if you lose sight of them, it becomes tameh? So the Gemara says, no. En amaretz makpid al magah chavero. Amaretz is not careful on the touch of his friend. In other words, yeah, you were metaher them. you told him to go to mikveh and do Araf Shemesh, all that. But the Amaretz, you leave him for 2 minutes, he sees his friend, he starts hugging him, and it's back tameh, right? Because he's not careful. He's not thinking in the world, in the world and rules and regulations of a life of tahara. He's not used to it. So he sees his friend, say, like, gives a kiss to his friend, and the whole thing becomes tameh again, right? So you have to be there, actually, or they have to be really watching themselves because they know that you need them to be careful.
On the second one, they didn't go and become tahor.
No, well, wait a second. No, this is the cases talk about a person that have them go through a process of tahara. All of it is talking about that, right? But the case is when you no longer see them, then they're not going to be careful anymore. Even though that they started tahor, they just went to mikveh, but now he sees his friend, he gives him a hug, the friend was tameh. And now everything becomes tameh, right? So says the Gemara, wait a second. If that's the case, so Resha should also be tameh. What's the difference still between Resha and Sefa? Yachi Resha nami. The Gemara says no. Resha beba lahem derech akalton. Resha is talking about the case that you could go on a surprise. You could start in a way that they're not expecting you. They know every second you could be coming. Every second you could be showing up. And they don't know whether or not you're seeing them. You're going to see them in just a second. So when the guy's friend comes to give him a hug, he says, like, I'm being hired to carry tarot. I'm careful. So he's afraid. He knows that you're watching him, could be watching him this second. So Gemara says, wait a second. So Yachi Sefa Nami. The Sefa also should be like that. And Gemara says, no. Remember what the language of the Braita was? The language was, he told them, you guys go, and I'm coming afterwards, right? So they're not expecting you every second. You guys go, and I will come afterwards. In that case, mismach samcha da'atahu, they think that this guy is not going to come any second, right? Until he comes, we just saw him lose sight of us, and until he wants to come, it's going to take another 2 hours, and who knows, maybe he's going to come even 3, 4, 5, 6 hours from now. So therefore, they let loose, and Amharis that lets loose is not going to be careful, even though that you just dunk him in the mikveh, still not going to work, because he himself is not careful and he's not mindful of the level of tahara that he has to be stringent for, and therefore it's got to become tameh, hadran alach, and dorshin, and Bezrat Hashem will be starting Perek Shlishi in the days to come.